What's up guys, I'm Theo Joe, and today I've got something cool for you. It's a review of one of LG's new OLED TVs this year, the GX, or rather G10 series. Specifically, this is the 65-inch model with the model number OLED 65GX PUA. Now, full disclosure, LG did provide me with this TV to review, so I didn't pay for it myself, but it's not like they're paying me money to do the review, but that will have no bearing on my opinion. Though I will point out the TV I'm coming from was also an LG OLED that I bought years ago, so I'm already pretty familiar with LG TVs and kind of prefer them anyway. But anyway, let's jump into it. The first thing to know is LG has several OLED model lineups. This year, for example, there's the B10 series, which is the most affordable. Then the next step up is the C10, which has the most recent Alpha 9 processor for AI upscaling, and the G10 series we'll be seeing in this video is apparently essentially the same as the C10 except for the form factor. Then there are even more expensive models such as the wallpaper and signature series. So about that form factor, the G in the G10 stands for gallery, and that's because unlike the C10, the G10 does not come with a stand, only a wall mount. It's designed specifically to be mounted on a wall such that it sits flat up against it with essentially zero gap, and it really does, as you can see, which is awesome. You can actually buy a stand for the G10 separately, but at that point you really may as well just get the C10 and save the cost difference. Now obviously wall mounting a TV will require additional work, and definitely will require at least 2 people. The TV is big and heavy, over 60 pounds, so don't try to do it yourself. I had a friend help me set it up, and while we were able to do it, I would definitely recommend just hiring a professional to install it, especially if you don't have wood studs and you'd be relying on drywall anchors. I don't know how that would work. I do have wood studs though, one of which was fortunately placed right where I wanted to mount the TV, so I feel very confident in the strength of the mount from having a couple of the huge included screws going into studs. And it does seem like the wall anchors included with the box are just for concrete, so if you are going to be using drywall anchors, you would have to buy them separately. So again, you probably want to just hire a professional to handle all of it for you. And of course, here's the obligatory shot of me unpeeling the plastic off the front when it was all set up. Let's get into the fun stuff though, the features. So this TV is indeed 4K, and being OLED, the picture obviously looks amazing. With OLED, the contrast quality you get is really unmatched just because of the nature of OLED, where if part of the image is supposed to be black, the pixel just turns off, so there's no light bleed from any backlight of any kind. And the viewing angles are also awesome. I noticed there is basically no color shift even when viewing at extreme angles. One important feature is the new Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor, which gives it AI upscaling capabilities. Apparently, LG basically used machine learning to create a database of what certain textures are supposed to look like at 4K, and then the processor can use that learned information to accurately upscale specific textures. And from my understanding, this AI upscaling is always on. It's not a setting, because anytime you have a display that is a higher resolution than the video source, it requires some form of upscaling, so this chip just processes it in a way that looks better. But even though there is no setting, I was able to test the difference using my Apple TV, which I set to always output at 4K resolution, so when watching something in 1080p, the Apple TV instead does the upscaling to 4K without any of the fancy AI processing, and basically tricks the TV into thinking it's already 4K, so it doesn't do any of the processing on it. Then to compare, I streamed the same 1080p content using one of the streaming apps built into the TV, so it would upscale it using AI. And I gotta say, it really does make a difference. 1080p content upscaled with AI looks absolutely tack sharp and really does look like true 4K. I was pretty surprised. I'm not sure if I'll be able to properly get it to show in the video because when you're close up, it's very subtle. You might be able to see some of these designs in this video are a bit more defined, but in real life at regular viewing distance, it's definitely noticeable. Now, when it comes to upscaling 720p content, I couldn't really tell the difference. Maybe it was just too subtle, but at least with 1080p, it definitely works. Now, there are a few actual AI settings in the menu though. There is a separate setting called AI Picture Pro, which is different from the AI upscaling and is supposed to improve faces and text characters and stuff like that in an image, though I found it hard to notice a difference with that, so I just leave it on. There's also AI Brightness, which adjusts the brightness of the image based on the ambient light, and auto genre selection, which adjusts the image based on type of content it thinks is being shown. For sound, there is an AI Sound Pro option, but we'll come back to that. There are plenty of other display features to talk about, such as the fact that the TV is not just 4K, but also 120Hz native refresh rate. And yes, it does have all HDMI 2.1 ports, which do all support up to 4K 120Hz. So definitely future-proofed there. And one of the HDMI ports is eARC for outputting audio via HDMI, which is actually how I connect it to my receiver. Another cool feature is Dolby Vision IQ, which is able to dynamically adjust the brightness of supported Dolby Vision content using the ambient light sensor built into the TV. So this is different from that AI brightness mode mentioned before, which I believe just kind of works all the time, or at least in some picture modes. The Dolby Vision IQ feature is specifically for movies and TV made with Dolby Vision, and apparently includes metadata on how bright an image should be and compares that to the light sensor data and then brightens it more accurately, not necessarily using AI. And from what I've read, the Cinema Home picture mode is what actually uses Dolby Vision IQ. The TV also supports the new Filmmaker mode as a picture profile, which effectively disables all post-processing of an image, so the movie will look as close to the original as possible, as opposed to something like the Vivid picture mode or other picture profile that might boost saturation, sharpness, or use motion smoothing and alter the true look of the film. Speaking of smoothing, yes, there are settings for that too, and be warned, they are enabled by default, called True Motion, though you do have several options here, including a custom user mode. I'm not a fan of motion smoothing, but I did find the Cinema Clear mode to be very subtle and not even noticeable. And I know using motion smoothing is like sacrilege because it can make stuff look really weird, but in some cases, because OLED panels have such low persistence, meaning the pixels switch so fast, at lower frame rates like 24 frames per second, it can actually sometimes make a video look choppy where it wouldn't on inferior displays. So I might just keep it on Cinema Clear going forward as long as I don't notice it's even on. For gaming, yes, this TV has that covered too. The G10 supports both G-Sync and FreeSync, though FreeSync apparently will be available later with an update, along with variable refresh rate, and there's also a specific picture mode called Game, which is optimized for low latency, I guess by reducing image processing, because TVs are typically notorious for input lag normally. And yes, the Game mode does make a huge night and day difference in input lag, to the point where I would not be able to play on anything but Game mode. The TV also supports so-called auto low latency mode, which will further reduce your input lag if your game console or computer supports it. As far as I know, the PS4 does not, but the Xbox One S and X do, as long as you enable it in the console settings you can see here. Then when you do go to play, it will pop up saying low latency mode is enabled, so you know. And apparently the latency does go down to 1 millisecond, which is impressive. So to be clear, your console doesn't need to support low latency mode to use the TV's game mode, that's just extra, and the low latency mode did seem to have a further subtle improvement, but it was a little bit harder to tell. Alright, as for sound quality, I think the internal speakers do sound pretty good. I don't personally use them because I have a surround sound system, which I think sounds even better, but you won't be disappointed if you use the internal speakers. Like you saw before, there is a setting called AI Sound Pro, which supposedly improves the audio, but that is disabled here because I'm using external speakers. But when I did try using the internal speaker, it did sound better and clearer with the AI Sound Pro, but I'm not sure if it's just because it made it a bit louder. There's also a feature called AI Acoustic Tuning that uses the microphone in the remote to calibrate the speaker based on the room, and you can then choose from a few different modes. As for other audio features, it does support Dolby Atmos built in, and also the ability to use external wireless Bluetooth speakers as surround sound speakers, which is cool. Alright, now let's talk about WebOS, which is the name of the operating system for the TV, or the user interface basically. I really do like the UI in LG TVs, and this one is pretty similar to my old TV from 2015, just a bit different. You can control everything using the so-called magic remote it comes with, and I'd say the main button you'll be using is the button with the house, which brings up the list of apps. And also, if you press the middle scroll wheel, it brings up a cursor that you can use to click on everything, and you can actually just tilt the controller around to point at whatever you want. It just uses accelerometers to detect position, and the remote connects through wireless, not infrared by default. So the remote doesn't have to be in line of sight for it to work, so don't think that you need to hold out your arm and point it at the TV to use it. And I found they really improved the pointer responsiveness since my old TV. This one seems much more instant and responsive. Anyway, you'll see a list of apps like Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and you can scroll to the end to go into edit mode to move them around. Also, if you go to the LG content store, you can search for additional apps like Plex, for example, that might not be installed by default, and you can uninstall apps you don't want. The thing that's nice about all these apps is they all work with the Magic Remote too. So it's way easier to search for stuff using the TV apps because you can just use the cursor to type and select things on the screen. One really cool app that comes installed is the Art Gallery app, which will rotate through different paintings and images and show it with a picture frame. And since the TV is so completely flat against the wall, it almost really does look like a picture hanging on the wall. It's pretty cool. Also on the app bar, not really sure what it's actually called, on the left side, you'll see more shortcuts. For example, there's a search feature where you can search for something, I believe, across all apps that you have installed. There's also a home dashboard, which will show you all sorts of stuff connected to the TV in one way or another, such as all the different HDMI inputs or media servers on your network, though you can just use the input button on the remote too. It also has Apple AirPlay, or you can add support for smart home devices and control them through the dashboard too. The TV shortcut will take you to live TV if you have either antenna or cable hooked directly into the TV, but there's also what are called LG channels, which are basically like internet TV channels, some from well-known stations like ABC or NBC News, stuff like that. And they just show up in the channel list as IP channels and seem to behave the same as other traditional channels. Now, one thing I don't like that I need to point out is that by default, when you open up the app list from the remote, there will be a stupid, obnoxious ad all the way to the left-hand side that shows up every time you open the menu. And it seriously was bugging me until I found the little setting inconspicuously called Home Promotion you can disable, which gets rid of it. Seriously, if there's one thing I hate, it's advertisements built into your freaking television, but at least you can disable it. Oh, and there's also another setting in the menus called Do Not Sell My Personal Information. Yes, please. Anyway, we can talk more about the settings, which can be accessed by pressing the gear button on the remote. First, it will bring up a quick settings menu that you can edit with a limited number of settings you can add to this, though I wish you were allowed to add any of the settings you wanted. Then you can access the full settings from here. I'm obviously not going to get into all the settings, but you can see the basics here. Like you can choose between different picture profiles and customize them too, and you can change them quite a bit however you want. Everything from the color gamma to white balance or changing that true motion setting or noise reduction, all sorts of stuff. One thing I noticed is that when the input device is using Dolby Vision or HDR, like I am with my Apple TV, you actually get a different set of picture modes that weren't available before. I assume this is because the picture mode settings wouldn't do the same thing when applied to an HDR video. And you'll know you're in HDR mode because at the top right, there will be a pop-up that says either HDR or Dolby Vision when that type of video signal is being sent to the TV. Also worth noting is when you change the picture mode for one input device like HDMI 1, it will remember each device separately having different picture settings, which is nice. Also, as a fun fact, I found out there is a super secret diagnostics menu which can be accessed by going to the channel menus. Then with the channel tuning option highlighted, you press 11111 and then it shows you all sorts of information about the TV, such as firmware and hardware versions and info about Wi-Fi and HDMI connection. And if you are currently on an HDMI input, you can select HDMI mode to see even more crazy info, most of which I have no idea what it means, but it's still cool. And this is how I checked to make sure the Apple TV was putting out a 4K signal, even though I was watching 1080p content when I was comparing that AI upscaling, because it shows you the resolution, frame rate, bit depth, variable refresh rate info, all sorts of stuff. Finally, in the settings, for anyone worried about OLED burn-in, there is a menu called OLED Screensaver, which has several features to help with that. By default, the TV will use a screensaver anyway if the content on the TV is static for 2 minutes, but these features help further. So there's what's called screen shift, which will slightly shift the image every once in a while, so pixels are less likely to just show the same exact color the whole time. And it's not noticeable at all. I think it just moves it a few pixels. I've never actually noticed it happen. There's also a logo luminance adjustment, which detects static logos on the screen and apparently dims them, like for cable news shows, though I don't really watch live TV, so I wasn't able to get an example of it in action. And finally, the TV uses what's called pixel refresh, which apparently happens every time you turn off the TV after watching for many hours, where it somehow refreshes the pixels to prevent ghosting. The TV will just look like it's off, so you won't even notice, but apparently makes a big difference. All that being said though, you probably don't have to worry about ghosting or image retention. Even in the 4+ years I've had my old OLED, I never had burn-in, and the only time I had some image retention was when I left my NVIDIA Shield on a menu for like 8 hours and the screensaver didn't kick in. And then there was a slight ghosting for about a day before it went away. And from what I understand, it's actually really hard to get permanent burn-in on an OLED, so nothing like the old plasmas. The final feature I can talk about briefly is the voice control. The TV seems to come with 2 voice assistants, namely LG's built-in assistant and the Google Assistant. And you can give the TV a command by holding down the middle microphone button and then talking into it. And based on the command, either the LG Assistant or Google Assistant will respond. For example, you can ask it to search for Star Trek on Netflix, and the LG Assistant will show you the results for that search specifically for Netflix. You can also ask it to open a specific app, which it will do. For other searches that aren't TV related, like what's the weather tomorrow, the result will be given by Google Assistant. I don't know how often I'll actually use this considering I have a ton of Google Home devices around already, but it's still nice. So that pretty much covers what I think are the most relevant features, and overall, I think this TV is awesome. I mean, I was already a fan of LG TVs considering I've owned one for years, so take that as you will. I was mostly impressed by the upscaling. I really do think it does a great job on improving 1080p content. It's not like a miraculous difference or anything, especially when sitting at a distance, but I do think it could make some high quality HD content pass as 4K. This is also my first wall mounted TV, and I think it looks cool. It makes the room seem a bit more open despite the TV being 10 inches larger than my previous one that had a stand. Though obviously being wall mounted is a bit tougher to get the wires connected in the back there. Again, you could always go with the C10 model, which is apparently pretty much the same, just with a stand. Also, when you get a TV like this, you are pretty much future-proofed for a while. It has 4K at 120 Hz, so you're definitely set for the next-gen gaming consoles, and it supports the gaming features like low latency, variable refresh rate, eARC, and all that. Also, one feature the G10 has that the C10 apparently does not is ATSC 3.0, aka Next Gen TV, which is an upcoming upgrade to the over-the-air antenna-based TV that will be able to do things like 4K, among other things, though that won't really be rolled out for a while in most places. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Thanks again to LG for sending me this TV to review and keep. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll try to respond when I can. If you guys want to watch another review, you can check out my review of the iPhone 11 Pro that came out last year. I'll put that link right there. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.